What's up, friends? I know you are looking good wherever you are, wearing your PJs, really sinking into this COVID fashion, okay? If you missed last week's episode, click the card above. We talked about why Yamaha is discontinuing the R6. All week, I've been crying myself to sleep just thinking about it, but I've also felt inspired to sketch the 2020 Yamaha R6, so that's what I've done. And it was a little bit of a beast to tackle. But grab a pen, pencil, or a drawing utensil, because while yes, I will be dropping lines, we're also going to drop some knowledge and talk about the history from 1999 through to today of the YZF-R6. Let's get into it. Predecessor to the R6 was the YZF-R600. It had a decade-long run and was the sport bike for its time. 1999 was the introduction of the YZF-R6. And since its inception, the R6 has always had a focus on racetrack performance. And that was true in 1999. This bike was only $7,999, call it $8,000 at the time, and produced about 100 horsepower. It was a carbureted engine. And Yamaha has taken this philosophy of making many small changes, and you combine all those in aggregate and get one larger performance enhancement. So for a lot of these years during development from 1999, it's hard to point at major moments of transformation because they've just been continually iterating and perfecting over time. Again, with an eye towards racetrack performance, and the proof is in the pudding, as they say. This bike did really well competitively, while maybe suffering on the street rider front a bit at times. 2001 was one of these updated moments where they made a handful of changes that hard to really point at singularly, but together they were a large improvement in performance. 2003 was the first true full refresh. This was a motor that introduced fuel injection, as the other manufacturers had done as well, and new aesthetics. From this point in 2003 to 2006, the only major changes that they made were in 2005, and that included radial mounted brakes and inverted front forks. And they also increased the tire size a little bit in the front to reduce the squirreliness that some riders on track were experiencing and complaining about. In 2006 is the last major overhaul of the R6. 2006 to 2020 are all using the same engine and chassis setup. Right, so 2006 is a monumental year for the R6. And again, it was really focused on racetrack performance. It produced 111 horsepower. They managed to shorten the wheelbase 5 millimeters, which sharpened the steering geometry a bit. Again, focused on the racetrack and really catering to that user. One of the major complaints that riders had about this 2006 R6 was that it lacked low and mid-range torque, which is a disadvantage both on the track and on street, especially on street where you need to really wind it out to access the power. It's just not that usable. So in 2008, they made some changes. They increased the compression ratio and gave it larger crossover pipes to increase that mid and low end torque. And from this point on, from 2008 to 2017, there weren't any major changes. There were continual iterations and making adjustments for emission standards and things like this. So there were some moments in between 2008 and 2017 where performance actually was worse than the year before. Not by much, but a little bit, trying to accommodate for a changing emissions landscape. 2017 is the last year that we get a full visual refresh of the R6. And really what they've done is it's the same chassis, same motor, same platform. All of the aero and the aesthetics have been redone to make the bike more aerodynamic so that it can cut through the air better than the previous version. And they also included some of the electronics that we find on the R1, right? Like the ABS and different stability controls and this type of thing are the only major engine modifications that we see from 2006 to 2020, or these electronic enhancements. And the bike that we see in 2017 is essentially the same bike that we see in 2020, which is the last road-going R6 to be produced by Yamaha. Listen, that's the history of the Yamaha R6 in just a few minutes, and there's a lot more details that you could dig into if you want to do some more homework. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. Feel free to correct me if I missed anything or got anything wrong in the comments below. And from this point on, I'm going to turn my eyes to the sketch that's going on behind us. And if you care to see that, feel free to just click to the end if you want to see the end product. I will say that this bike was hard to capture. It was a bit like a vampire trying to take a photo of a vampire. It just doesn't want to be captured. But I think we get pretty close and come out with a pretty cool sketch. If that's your thing, watch to the end. If not, feel free to jump to the end to see the result. I'm going to go into voiceover mode and talk about what you see in this sketch here. So if you've been here before and you've seen some of these marker sketches, you'll know that I'm using a C1, a C2, a C4, and a C6 Copic marker to create the sketch that you see here. I'm also using a Prismacolor pencil, and I come in and tighten up lines after I've created an underlay for myself using a lighter marker like this C1 or a cool gray 1. At this point here, I've already laid in my under sketch. I've gotten to a little bit of using the C2, and getting the front of this bike correct was a struggle, and I had to continue to rework it in the light C1. And part of the struggle was that this bike is tilted because it's on a kickstand, so getting that perspective right and grabbing the proportion of the front and capturing that properly while having it tilted in perspective was absolutely a challenge, and I don't think I entirely got there on this sketch, but that's okay. This will not be the last sketch. It doesn't matter if you win them all. What matters is that you come back and get after it again. So we will be getting after another motorcycle sketch, but I do think that this does come out pretty well, even though the front is a little twisted in a certain way. At this point, again, I'm coming through, tightening up the marker sketch with this Prismacolor and creating a more legible framework that I can come in and use the C4 and the C6 marker to really start to punch out and add contrast to certain elements. The reference image that I'm using is of a darker matte black R6, so I do use the C4 and the C6 a bit more judiciously in this particular sketch than in some previous sketches, which if you haven't seen them, click the card above to check some of those sketches out. And here I am coming in with the C4. You want to set back that radiator section to really let that front tire pop out and stand off a little bit. You want it to be its own element, so you want to set some of the darker elements that are in shadow back by using a darker marker. I'm coming in and still with the C4 and a little bit of the C6, just carving out graphically some of those aero pieces where we've got some engine exposed and cutouts in the fairings, just really blocking those out to make sure that we're getting the graphic read correct, and building up certain forms or on the fairings on the body side. And we really want that front tire to pop. Well, not literally pop, but visually we want it to stand off. So I'm using some more of the C4 and the C6 to create those darker hues to make this sketch stand off. And again, I am creating a bit of a vignette, which means that it goes from darker in the front to a little bit lighter in the back. And I'm doing that by slowly building this sketch up. All right, so I've started with a C1 and C2, which I use throughout most of the sketch. And then as I get into the C4 and the C6, while I am using the C4 through more of the sketch because the bike is darker, I don't use the C6 more towards the rear wheel and the subframe area and that section, because I want the sketch to be a little bit lighter in the back half so that we can really highlight this front section and get a bit more drama and a little bit more atmospheric perspective. Even though in real life you might not see this type of atmospheric perspective because the distance between the front and the back is, a few feet. You really only see atmospheric perspective when you're looking out over a mountain range or something like this. But for the artistic element and for art's sake and drama's sake, we incorporate that in our sketches because it makes them more interesting to look at versus having everything being rendered in full detail and full contrast. Your eye just doesn't know where to look or where to focus. So here we are coming through with the C6 and really now starting to punch in some of those darker darks around the radiator and some of the front intakes, and really making that front mirror, the right side mirror, stand off a bit more so that you know that it's a separate element and not just some muddled part of the windscreen. We want to make that detail clear. And then coming back in after I've got some of the C6 laid out and just tightening up elements. And we're using Bienfang marker paper, so that we do get a little bit of bleed here and there. So I'm using the Prismas to tighten up elements to make sure that we're getting crisp lines and proper definition through that front section specifically, and making sure that we get nice delineation between the variety or the various fender and fairing elements. This has this interesting layered fairing geometry, so we want to make sure that we're getting credit for all of those different parts and pieces. And to get a little bit of extra contrast and darker values, I come through with that Prismacolor and even just add some light shading over top of the marker to get a little bit darker value. And that's how we do it. If you found some value here, leave a like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Later.